Girls don't need fancy degrees. My Uncle Vernon said those words at Thanksgiving dinner when I was 19 years old, and by Christmas, my parents had emptied my college fund and handed it to my brother instead. But 10 years later, when the Morrison Family Foundation paid $50,000 for a keynote speaker at their annual reunion, they didn't recognize the name on the contract until I walked through the door. Before I tell you how my family reacted when they realized the world-renowned economist they'd been bragging about for months was the same girl they'd thrown away. Take a moment to subscribe and comment below where you're watching from. This story might just change how you see education, family, and the price of believing in yourself. My name is Samantha Morrison. I grew up in a small town called Ridgewood in rural Pennsylvania, the kind of place where everybody knows everybody and gossip travels faster than Wi-Fi. My family, the Morrisons, were considered local royalty. My grandfather had built a successful construction empire in the 1960s, and by the time I was born, we had the biggest house on the hill and a family foundation that donated to every church, school, and charity in the county. But being a Morrison came with rules. Unspoken rules that everyone understood. The men ran businesses. The women ran households. The sons inherited. The daughters married well. I was the youngest of 4 children and the only girl. My 3 older brothers, Marcus, Dean, and Trey, were groomed from birth to take over different branches of Grandpa's company. Marcus got construction. Dean got real estate. Trey got equipment rentals. They were given cars at 16, corner offices at 22, and trust funds that made them millionaires before 30. Me? I was given a hope chest and told to focus on finding a good husband. But I didn't want a hope chest. I wanted Harvard. From the time I was 12 years old, I knew I wanted to study economics. I was fascinated by how money moved through the world, how policies affected poverty, how markets could lift people up or crush them down. I read books that my teachers had never heard of. I entered competitions and won. By junior year of high school, I had a 4.3 GPA, perfect SAT scores, and a guidance counselor who told me I had a real shot at the Ivy League. My parents smiled politely whenever I mentioned my dreams. "That's nice, sweetheart," my mother would say. "But don't get your hopes too high." My father was more direct. "College is expensive, Samantha. Let's see what scholarships you get." I did get scholarships, partial ones from 3 different schools. But my dream school, Harvard, offered only a small grant. The rest, nearly $40,000 a year, would have to come from somewhere else. That somewhere, I assumed, would be the same place that had paid for my brother's educations, the family. I was wrong. The Thanksgiving before my freshman year, I gathered my courage and formally asked my parents if they would help cover the gap. I had spreadsheets. I had a plan to work part-time. I had researched every loan option available. I just needed their support. My father listened quietly. My mother looked uncomfortable. And then my Uncle Vernon, my father's older brother, the patriarch of the Morrison clan since Grandpa died, cleared his throat. "Frank," he said to my father, "can I speak freely?" My father nodded. Vernon leaned back in his chair, a half-eaten turkey leg in his hand. "Why are we even discussing this? Samantha's a smart girl, sure. But she's a girl. What's she going to do with a Harvard degree? Marry better?" He laughed at his own joke. "Save the money, Frank. Put it toward Marcus's expansion project. Or better yet, Dean's new development. Those investments will actually pay off." I felt my face burn. "Uncle Vernon, I'm going to be an economist. I want to work in policy, maybe teach at a university someday." "Teach?" He snorted. "You want your father to spend $200,000 so you can make 60 grand a year grading papers?" He shook his head. "Girls don't need fancy degrees, Samantha. They need stability. Find a good man, have some kids, and let the men handle the complicated stuff." I looked at my parents, waiting for them to defend me. They didn't. My mother stared at her plate. My father rubbed his temples. And one by one, I watched my brothers nod along with Uncle Vernon like puppets on strings. "He's got a point, Sam," Marcus said with a shrug. "Harvard's a lot of money for something that might not even work out." The conversation moved on. They started talking about Dean's new property development like my entire future had just been dismissed in 30 seconds. That night, I cried myself to sleep. By Christmas, my parents made their decision official. The money they'd saved for my education, roughly $80,000, was being redistributed. Half went to Marcus for his business expansion. The other half went into a fund for my future wedding. A wedding fund. As if a white dress was supposed to replace my dreams. I didn't scream. I didn't beg. I just looked at my parents and said, "I'll do it without you." My mother actually laughed. "Sweetheart, be realistic. How are you going to afford Harvard on your own?" "I don't know yet," I said. "But I'll figure it out." And I did. I deferred my Harvard acceptance for 1 year. During that year, I worked 3 jobs: waitressing in the morning, retail in the afternoon, tutoring at night. I applied for every scholarship, grant, and fellowship I could find. I wrote essays until my fingers cramped. I sold my car, moved into a tiny apartment with 4 roommates, and lived on ramen and determination. By the following September, I had cobbled together enough funding to cover my first year. Barely. The next 4 years were brutal. I worked 25 hours a week while carrying a full course load. I took summer classes to graduate early and save money. I won a research fellowship my junior year that covered most of my senior expenses. And when I walked across that stage to receive my diploma, magna cum laude, Phi Beta Kappa, I was 23 years old, exhausted, and completely alone. No one from my family came to graduation. I'd stopped calling them years ago, and they'd never once reached out. After Harvard, I was offered a position at a prestigious economic think tank in Washington, D.C. I spent 5 years there, publishing papers, advising congressional committees, and building a reputation as one of the sharpest young economists in the country. At 28, I was recruited by the World Bank. At 30, I became the youngest senior policy advisor in their history. Along the way, I wrote a book, Breaking Ceilings, Economic Policy and Gender Inequality, that became an unexpected bestseller. It was translated into 14 languages. I was interviewed by major news networks. I gave a TED Talk that went viral. Forbes put me on their 30 under 30 list, and then their 40 under 40 when I kept climbing. By 32, I had done everything Uncle Vernon said I couldn't. And I hadn't spoken to my family in over a decade. Then, one afternoon, I received an unusual email. It was from an event coordinator at the Morrison Family Foundation, yes, my family's foundation, inviting me to be the keynote speaker at their annual reunion and charity gala. The event was held every summer at my grandfather's old estate, bringing together Morrisons from across the country for a weekend of networking, philanthropy, and self-congratulation. The theme this year was Women in Leadership. I almost laughed out loud. The coordinator clearly had no idea who I was. My professional name was Dr. Samantha Ellis, Ellis being my mother's maiden name, which I'd adopted when I cut ties with the Morrisons. She only knew me as the best-selling author and World Bank advisor whose speaking fee was $50,000. My first instinct was to delete the email. My second instinct was much more interesting. I replied and accepted the invitation. The reunion was held on a Saturday in late July. I drove up to Ridgewood the night before and stayed at a hotel in the next town over. I barely slept, not from nerves, but from anticipation. For 10 years, I had imagined this moment. Now it was actually happening. The estate looked exactly as I remembered: sprawling green lawns, white tents, string lights hanging from the oak trees. Catering trucks lined the gravel drive. A huge banner proclaimed Morrison Family Foundation, 40th Annual Gala, in gold letters. I parked my rental car near the back and checked my reflection in the mirror. I wore a tailored navy dress, my grandmother's pearl earrings, the only thing IED kept from my old life, and a confidence IED earned one painful year at a time. The event coordinator, a young woman named Brittany, met me at the back entrance. "Dr. Ellis, we're so honored to have you. Everyone's been talking about your book for months." She guided me toward the main tent. "The family is especially excited. Mr. Vernon Morrison himself suggested we invite you. He said, and I quote, 'We need more powerful women like her to inspire the young ladies in our family.'" I almost choked. How thoughtful of him, I managed. Inside the tent, long tables were filled with Morrisons I hadn't seen in over a decade. I spotted my parents near the front, my father grayer, my mother thinner, both of them laughing at something my brother Marcus was saying. Dean and Trey sat nearby with their wives and children. And at the head table, holding court like always, was Uncle Vernon. He looked older. Heavier. But he still had that same smug expression, that same certainty that he was the smartest person in any room. Brittany led me to a small stage at the front of the tent. A podium had been set up with a microphone and a large screen displaying my professional headshot, the one from my book jacket, where I looked polished and serious and nothing like the 19-year-old girl they'd dismissed. "We'll start in about 5 minutes, Brittany said. "Mr. Morrison will introduce you." Of course he would. I stood behind the stage curtain, watching as the crowd settled into their seats. Champagne was poured. Laughter rippled through the tent. A small orchestra played softly in the background. Then Uncle Vernon took the stage. "Good evening, everyone." His voice boomed through the speakers. "Welcome to the 40th Annual Morrison Family Gala. As you know, this year's theme is Women in Leadership, and we've spared no expense to bring you a truly inspirational speaker." The crowd applauded politely. Dr. Samantha Ellis is a Harvard graduate, a best-selling author, and a senior advisor at the World Bank. She's been featured in Forbes, The New York Times, and Time magazine. She's advised presidents and prime ministers. And tonight, she's going to share her wisdom with us. Vernon grinned proudly, as if he'd discovered me personally. Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome Dr. Samantha Ellis. The applause swelled as I stepped out from behind the curtain. And then it stopped. I watched my uncle's face first. His smile froze, then crumbled into confusion. His eyes narrowed. His mouth opened slightly, like he was trying to speak but had forgotten how. I looked at my father next. The color drained from his face so quickly I thought he might faint. My mother grabbed his arm, her eyes wide with shock. My brothers just stared, their champagne glasses suspended halfway to their lips. The entire tent had gone silent. 300 Morrisons, all holding their breath. I stepped up to the podium and smiled. Good evening, everyone. Some of you might not recognize me, it has been 10 years, after all. But I'm sure Uncle Vernon remembers me. I turned to look directly at him. After all, you're the one who convinced my parents that girls don't need fancy degrees. A gasp rippled through the crowd. Vernon's face turned purple. Now wait just a minute. No, I think I've waited long enough. I turned back to the audience, my voice steady and clear. 10 years ago, I sat at a Thanksgiving table in this very family and begged for help paying for college. I had worked my entire life for a chance at Harvard. I had the grades, the scores, the acceptance letter. All I needed was support. I paused, letting the silence build. Instead, I was told that girls don't need education. That I should find a husband and let the men handle the complicated stuff. My parents took the money they'd saved for my future and gave it to my brothers. I was offered a wedding fund instead of a future. Murmurs spread through the crowd. I saw younger cousins exchanging shocked glances. Wives elbowed their husbands. So I left, I continued. I worked 3 jobs. I lived on nothing. I earned my way into Harvard and then earned my way to the top of my field. I wrote a book that's been read by millions of people. I've advised governments on economic policy that has lifted thousands of families out of poverty. And I did it all without a single dollar or word of encouragement from this family. I looked at my parents. My mother was crying silently. My father wouldn't meet my eyes. You paid $50,000 for me to be here tonight, I said. $50,000 for a few hours of my time. Do you know what that money could have done 10 years ago? It could have covered more than a full year of my education. It could have changed everything, and it would have meant I still had a family. I reached into my pocket and pulled out a check, one I'd written that morning. I'm donating my speaking fee back to this foundation, with one condition: it must be used to create a scholarship fund for Morrison women who want to pursue higher education. Not wedding funds. Not hope chests. Degrees. I set the check on the podium. I'm calling it the Eleanor Morrison Scholarship, after my grandmother, the only person in this family who ever told me I could be anything I wanted. The tent erupted. Some people applauded. Others sat frozen. I saw several young women my cousin's ages wiping tears from their eyes. Uncle Vernon stormed toward the stage. This is ridiculous. You can't just come in here and what, Uncle Vernon? I stepped forward to meet him. Tell the truth? You've spent 40 years telling the women in this family what they can't do. Well, here's what I did: I proved you wrong. And now every girl sitting in this tent knows that your opinion doesn't matter. Vernon's face twisted with rage, but before he could respond, something unexpected happened. My cousin Lily, Vernon's own granddaughter, barely 17, stood up from her seat. I want to apply for that scholarship, she said, her voice shaking but determined. I want to go to medical school. And Grandpa told me the same thing he told Samantha, that it was a waste of money. She looked at Vernon with tears in her eyes. I don't want to be told what I can't do anymore. Another young woman stood. Then another. Within moments, a dozen Morrison women were on their feet, some crying, some defiant, all of them looking at me like I'd given them permission to dream. I felt something crack open in my chest, something that had been frozen for 10 years. After the speech, I tried to slip away quietly. I'd said what I came to say. I didn't need reconciliation. I didn't need apologies. I just needed them to know. But as I reached my car, I heard footsteps behind me. Samantha. Wait. I turned. It was my mother. She looked smaller than I remembered, fragile in a way that surprised me. Her eyes were red and swollen, her careful makeup ruined by tears. I don't expect you to forgive me, she said, her voice breaking. I don't deserve it. But I need you to know. I've regretted that decision every single day for 10 years. Every time I saw your name in an article, every time someone mentioned your book, I thought about what we did. What I let happen. She took a shaky breath. You were the bravest one of all of us, Samantha. And I was too much of a coward to stand up for you. I didn't know what to say. Part of me wanted to hug her. Part of me wanted to scream. I'm proud of you, she whispered. I know I have no right to be. But I am. I'm so proud of who you've become. I stood there for a long moment, the summer night warm around us, the sounds of the gala fading in the distance. I'm not ready to forgive you, I finally said. I don't know if I ever will be. But I'm glad you said that. She nodded, tears streaming down her face. That's more than I deserve. I got in my car and drove away. In the rearview mirror, I could see her still standing there, watching me go. That was 2 years ago. Since then, the Eleanor Morrison Scholarship has funded education for 23 young women in my family. 3 are in medical school. 2 are studying engineering. 1, my cousin Lily, just got accepted to Johns Hopkins. Uncle Vernon suffered a stroke last year. He's mostly recovered, but he doesn't attend family events anymore. I'm told he doesn't talk much about me. My parents and I email occasionally now. It's not warm. It's not what we had before. But it's something. Small steps toward something that might, someday, look like healing. My brothers have never reached out. I don't expect them to. Some people can't admit they were wrong, even when the evidence is standing right in front of them. But I don't need their approval anymore. I never did. Last month, I received an invitation to speak at Harvard's graduation ceremony. Me, the girl who almost couldn't afford to attend, giving advice to the next generation of students. I stood at that podium and looked out at thousands of young faces full of hope and uncertainty. And I told them the same thing I'm telling you now: the people who doubt you are not your destiny. The voices that say you can't, you shouldn't, you won't, they are not prophecy. They are fear dressed up as wisdom. They are limitations disguised as love. You don't need permission to chase your dreams. You don't need approval to prove your worth. The only person who gets to decide what you're capable of is you. My uncle said girls don't need fancy degrees. I have 2 of them now. And I'm just getting started. If you enjoyed this story, don't forget to subscribe and comment below where you're watching from. I'd love to know how many people are out there proving someone wrong right now. And remember, the best revenge isn't success. It's just becoming so undeniable that the people who doubted you have to pay $50,000 just to hear you speak. This is Samantha Morrison Ellis. And this is my truth.